Alexei's face pressed into cold, reeking concrete. By the toilet bucket, he gasped for air, tried to break free, but his beaten body wouldn't respond. They stuffed a filthy, wet rag in his mouth so his screams wouldn't shatter the dead silence of the cell. "Quiet, princess," hissed one of the enforcers, former inmates, now executioners of this cell. "Daddy's gonna teach you how to live here. This ain't a robbery or a debt collection. This is an execution. Slow, ritualistic, and for everyone to see. Not of the body, but of the soul." In the corner sat Gray, a zakone, thief-in-law, the godfather of this world. His face, wrinkled and severe, looked like an old, cracked map of prisons and labor camps. His eyes flickered with the icy indifference of a surgeon preparing an amputation. One of his lieutenants approached, whispered something in his ear, nodding toward the new arrivals. Gray slowly scanned the newcomers, his gaze settling on Alexei, the new inmate with an invisible mark on his forehead that everyone somehow knew. A scumbag who violated the ultimate code. He'd raised his hand against a woman. Two convicts, built like bulldogs, slowly rose and moved toward Alexei. "Yo, homeboy, got a light?" one asked, getting right in his face. Alexei, trying to hide his trembling, reached into his pocket. That's when the first punch landed in his solar plexus. Air ripped from his chest with a whistle. He doubled over. The second blow hit the back of his head. Darkness. He woke on the floor by the toilet bucket. The same two stood over him, along with several others whose faces twisted with vicious grins, anticipating the ritual of degradation. The lowering ceremony began, the destruction of manhood, the transformation into a rooster, prison slang for the untouchable caste. Everything happened in full view of the cell, which watched silently and grimly. This was a lesson for everyone. They forced him to kiss boots, slapped and kicked him, humiliating him in front of everyone. His bowl was marked with a hole scratched by a nail, the sign of the offended caste. Now he had to eat only from this dish, sleep under the bunks, and do the dirty work. Anyone who touched him would become just as low and shameful. Gray just fingered his prayer beads, silently lost in thought. For him, justice had been served. The filth had been put in its place. But for Alexei, this was the beginning of a 10-year hell. The status of offended, it's not just punishment, it's lifelong torture. Morning in the cell didn't begin with sunlight, but with the clang of a metal tray and the smell of slimy oatmeal. For most, just another day in hell. For Alexei, the first day of his new death. His body ached, but physical pain was nothing compared to the icy horror in his soul. He was no longer human, just a function, a dirty stain on the prison uniform of this world. When food distribution started, he tried to get in line, but he was roughly shoved aside with disgust, as if he were a leper. "Forgot your place, rooster," he heard, as a marked bowl with leftover porridge was thrown on the floor before him. He sat in his corner, choking down cold, slimy food, feeling dozens of eyes on him. There was no sympathy, just a mixture of contempt, fear, and primal satisfaction. For everyone, he became the baseline, the bottom from which they could push off to feel better about themselves. Later, when the cell was taken out for exercise, an elderly Khan with dead eyes approached Alexei. They called him Quiet. He was in the offended caste and knew how to survive. "Want to make it to tomorrow? Forget who you were," he whispered without looking at him. "You're nobody. Don't touch anyone. Don't say anything unnecessary. Eat from your bowl, sleep under the bunks, and pray that Gray's in a good mood. Any word or glance, a reason for a beating. Your job, mop floors, clean the toilet buckets, do whatever they say. No questions. Alexei looked at Gray. Surrounded by his entourage, he calmly discussed something. Even the guards in the towers looked at him with apprehension. A dispute over a cigarette broke out in the yard, quickly escalating into a fight. Gray simply raised his hand. Everything froze. He split the cigarette in two and said, "Smoke, and I don't want to hear any more noise. There's order here, and it's mine, not the administration's." Alexei began to understand that cruelty wasn't chaos. It was the highest form of order. He was an element of that order, an example for others. That night, exhausted and humiliated, he dozed under the bunks and dreamed of home. His wife, his old life, a contrast that brought pain worse than any torture. A kick and a scream woke him. "Hey, Rooster, what, getting comfortable? You're breathing on my slippers, trying to contaminate them." They dragged him to the middle of the cell again and beat him silently, methodically. When he couldn't even moan anymore, he raised his eyes and saw Gray's gaze, cold, analytical. He understood he'd become not just an outcast, but a teaching tool, a lesson for everyone. A week passed, and he'd almost turned into a machine performing one job: live, fear, obey. The human part of his soul had nearly died, giving way to a hopeless survival instinct. Every morning he started at the toilet bucket, given a pail of dirty water and a rag. He was forced to scrub the latrine and floor until they shined, in front of the entire cell. This was the morning humiliation show, a reminder to all. You're alive, but not human. Once, when he'd almost finished, a young Blatnoy, career criminal, nicknamed Dandy, walked over and flicked cigarette ash on the clean floor. "Oops, my bad, little Rooster, didn't see it," he said mockingly, ordering him to clean it up again. Inside Alexei, a small spark of dignity flared, but animal fear extinguished it instantly. He obeyed, futilely trying to hide tears of self-hatred behind submission. Later, during the walk, Gray and his assistant watched Alexei obediently sweeping the yard. "We're not breaking him, we're putting him in his place," Gray said. "In our world, a killer kills for a reason, a thief steals by the code, but this one, he's a violator, a threat to stability. He's more than just an outcast. He's a problem that needs to be controlled." Alexei realized there was only one way left to regain control over his own life, through death. He hid a small, sharp piece of glass in his palm, the key to freedom. Night in the cell was the time of ghosts. Alexei lay under the bunks, holding that cold, sharp piece. He saw home, his wife, the smell of pies, memories that were now torture. He gripped the shard tightly. Tonight, he'd end it all. Just as he was about to execute his plan, he heard a quiet, close voice. Gray's. "I wouldn't advise it," whispered the thief, hanging from the upper bunk. His eyes burned with cold fire. Gray had been watching him for a long time, knew when a man approached the edge. "Hand it over," he ordered. With a trembling hand, Alexei extended the shard. Gray took it, tossed it into the darkness. "Fool," said the thief without anger, only with tired disappointment. "You think life and death are yours? You're wrong. You're property of the zone. Live and suffer, that's your job." Alexei understood he'd become not just a slave, but an instrument of the system, whose suffering brings stability to this entire hell. Time in prison flows in circles. Day turns to night. Roll call, slop, prison tea. He became part of the landscape, bars, and the smell of bleach, lost himself in the mechanism of survival. A new arrival appeared, a beast, cruel and immoral, challenging Gray's authority.